Hey, everybody, this is Al. It's week 9. We're here. It's Wednesday. Oh, it's dark at 5 o'clock. How you feeling, Jess, about the darkness?
All right about it.
All right about it.
Just okay.
You have such a good attitude. Hello, Jess.
Hi.
Lily, and Lily. Hello.
I feel good about the darkness.
I know. You feel good about all natural occurrences, basically, right?
It's true. It's bright in the morning now.
Lily is what you call aligned. She is aligned with her environment. Anna, hello.
I need some of that because I feel out of whack.
You're out of whack.
I'm out of
Davey,
whack.
are you in whack or out of whack?
No comment.
No comment. I see Gabe. Hi, Gabe.
Hello, how are you?
We're great. It's good to see you. Erica's there. Hi, Erica. Hello. And Dave Poplar is there from Arizona. Hi, Dave.
Hi, good evening.
Hey, and Max from Chicago. Hey, Max.
Hi, Al.
And Jason is here.
Hello, Al.
Hey, Jason. And we have, coming all the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota, ModPo, Joseph Houlihan. Joseph, say hi.
Hello, good evening.
How are you? No, hold the mic. So, how long
You're not getting out that
how
easy.
long have you been associated with ModPo?
I started watching the videos maybe 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and I just love it. It's a
Oh, it's
wonderful
great.
community.
He's here. So you're visiting Philly, not for ModPo, but this was just an added bonus.
A much anticipated
Great.
added bonus.
Fantastic. Welcome. Okay, great. Well, in a minute, I'm going to make a list of the poems. Actually, I'll do that now. Then I have a couple of announcements, and we'll get started with the first question. Meantime, the number is 610-616-3208, 610-616-3208. And for the first time ever, we are taking Skype calls. We will accept your Skype call. If you're calling from far, far away, this might be a little cheaper. And our Skype handle is ModPo Pen, ModPo space pen. Be like Al space Filreis, ModPo space pen, Skype. And I think Chris Martin can handle either of those things.
That's right.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Okay, first shout out. I don't know who sent these postcards to me, but it has to be T, except there was no letter that came with it. Zach, can you get real close? I don't think you can. Whoa. Well, you can't really see what it says. This one says, learn the
There you
language.
go. I can see it.
Let me hold that spot, Zach. Yeah. Leave me the land, scratch out the land, may prose and property both die out, and leave me peace. And one more. We're so happy to have these. A quote from Julia Block from a ModPo Live webcast in September 2015. It says, the dwelling is continuous. Obviously a reference. Ooh, sorry, Zach, wait a minute. Obviously a reference to Stein, week 4, 2015. That's really great.
Or
As a-
Dickinson, maybe.
I think dwelling, yeah,
Dwelling
right.
possibility.
Week 1, sorry. Speaking of Julia Block, the second caller today, or Skyper, is going to get, what's happening here with the light, is going to get a copy of Valley Fever, Julia Block's book. Okay, second announcement, one of her books. Second announcement. Last week in New York, I mentioned this book that I had received from Nicholas Stern, Denny, who is in what town?
Seattle.
He's in Seattle. Yep. And this is called, so I did get this book. It's called Digressions of an Extemporaneous Doodler. And Denny calls this concrete poetry. Certainly it's written with a slow hand and pictures. Anyway, it's wonderful. I've been looking at it recently. And Seattle makes me think of something. Do we have an announcement about Seattle, Anna?
I mean, we're going.
Well, say something.
Yeah, so we're going to Seattle.
We're going to Seattle.
We'd love to see you if you're a Seattlean.
Or if you
Seattlean?
like to go to Seattle, would like to travel to Seattle, we'd love to see you.
You want to travel to Seattle?
What are the dates?
January 9th.
9th.
It's a Thursday.
Thursday.
And we're going to leave
10th,
Sunday morning, the
11th.
12th.
And on the 12th, we're leaving. And where are we going?
Vancouver.
We're going to Vancouver. by train, it turns out, because
Apparently.
rental cars are too expensive. Yeah, and then we're going to be in Vancouver.
Unless
So
someone
if
has a
you're-
helicopter they want
If
to
you're a
lend us.
Seattle person or want to be in Seattle in January, I'm not sure anybody wants to be in Seattle in January, and want to go to Vancouver, meet us in Vancouver, please let us know. Okay, thank you. Another announcement. Nope, I've got this. We're going to go right to a question. It's based on a shout out to Colette Bates, longtime ModPoer. Now, here's what Colette did, okay? I'm about to read you a mezostic that Colette made, and the question I'm going to ask everyone to answer briefly is, the question is something like, well, what's the value of this? Why do this? Right? Why make a mezostic out of an existing poem? And in this case, it's a poem that's already worked. It's already an experimental poem, and that would be Silliman's Bart. So here's what Colette did. I'm going to describe it, and then I'm going to read the mezostic, and I'm going to ask everybody for a comment on why do this. What's the point? What's the value? Colette went to Bart and wanted to a range of material from the language of Bart. Bart, of course, was written, spontaneously or semi-spontaneously during the day of being on the rapid transit in San Francisco and Bay Area. And so Colette wanted to pull material from beginning to end from Bart, did not want an excerpt of the poem, didn't want phrases as fragments, didn't want to use a numerical selection method. So to create a filter to achieve what Colette did is listen to the audio and made a transcription of some things that she heard during the audio with her non-dominant hand in order to minimize subjective selection, allowing no pauses, no replays, just a once challenge of listening to the audio. Managed to write 307 words down with the other hand, and thus disrupting the text. Then she picked a Bernadette Mayer procedure to work on it, which was to extract words beginning in S. And she took the remnant S words, and instead of disposing of them, actually disposed everything else and only selected the remnant S words, then generated a mezostic after all that. So it's like 3 processes. And here is Bart, according to Colette Bates, after all of that. And the question is going to be, why do this? What's the value? Okay. Slow, slight spot, store, sign, steal, stand, scratch, see sign, silent, system, slope, still, surface, speaks, stops, stiletto, symbol, suddenly, speaker, showed speech, seems, system. All right. Davey, why do this? What's achieved? What's good? What's fresh? Why do it? What's the point? Other than that, it sounds like a lot of fun.
One point that is not what you think I'm going to say is to practice procedure and make it not scary. We have to do procedure all the time. We have to call the insurance company and make dinner and take our dog for a walk and do lots of procedures that are multi-part and multi-step and hard to get started on. That's part of what daily life is dealing with stuff that you don't want to do. And a mezostic is excellent practice for figuring out how to start a procedure where you don't know where it's going to go, you don't know what it's going to produce, but it's an exercise in process.
Very cool. Anna and then Gabe, what's the point? What's the value? Why do we like this?
One reason I really like it is it's a great way to make a poem that you admire or really don't admire. It can go kind of either way.
It becomes a kind of criticism?
A kind of criticism, and it makes it kind of alive for
How
you.
is this a criticism? I mean, you don't have the text in front of you, but I can find it. Where did I put it?
I wasn't really going to go in the direction of criticism. I was really more going to go in the direction of what a really tremendous way to co-create something with a writer whom you especially admire or whom you find really difficult, right? Bart is a really difficult text to read. It's really long. It's a continuous sentence. There's no breathing space in Bart intentionally. So actually doing something that's kind of compressive and selective with the language is a great way to make something different and make something new out of it.
All right, Gabe next, and then Lily. Why is this valuable to do, if you think so?
I think so because
it's another form of reading, this kind of writing. And so
Writing is reading. That's cool.
Well, yeah, but what's good about it is the same as what's good about reading, which is the opportunity to selectively absorb something else's view of the world or simulation of the world.
Yeah, and there's nothing like getting so inside a text, which she does 3 different ways, to really understand the language of that text. It's really a way of achieving a certain kind of deep understanding. Yeah, that's cool. Lily, then Jason?
I think a lot of the texts in our chapter this week are about processing, sometimes taken in the literal sense, meaning like computer processing. And so I think this is good to do because even if you don't consider your final result a poem, or even if you do, you've taken and legislated some space for yourself to process the work that you're reading. So just adding on to what Gabe said about reading, it's like making part of reading also processing.
Fantastic. Jason and then Jess?
And in a way, what Colette did was take the original instructions and extrapolated and added her own. And the Mesostic, even though it seems like perhaps a rigid formal exercise of kind of forced closed reading, is actually an invitation to come up with new rules. It's obviously a random crazy rule, so why not come up with more, and why not see what language is produced and how it pulls itself together once you've got it on the page.
That's great. Thank you. Jess, then Dave, then Erica?
Yeah.
You like it?
Yeah, I mean...
Is it a poem?
Yes. And I think something that Lily said, right? This is good to do, right? Your sentence started with that. And I think just the fact that it is a thing to do and that it feels like doing something is really valuable, because sometimes reading, right, just becomes so rote that it doesn't feel like we're doing anything, but to really activate the reading, as Gabe was saying,
Activate the reading.
As a process, and to make the process itself the creation or the outcome, to sort of question that duality of process and outcome.
Yeah.
This is just what everybody has been saying, but there's so much value in that.
Dave Poplar?
Yeah, this might be more of an observation, but I find it really interesting that even when we're doing close readings, it seems like we can't get away from authorial intent that's always there, even when we're just focusing on the language in the back of our minds. We're still thinking about the poet, but with this type of poetry, the poet becomes nothing more than really a facilitator, almost like what we're doing in MOOCs. So in that way, we're freed from that constraint of authorial intent, and gives us another way of looking at the text, almost like we're being code breakers. I've been reading a lot about World War II and the code breakers, and how they analyze information that they didn't really understand. They only knew bits and pieces of it, and it seems like that's what we're doing here. We're finding meaning in a completely different way.
Did I hear in the middle of that a reference to this particular setting, ModPo? Yeah, and so in a way, if we're going to interpret Colette's effort, the fully contextual meaning of it is to be found in this thing that she did in the spirit of the assignment number 4, posting it, getting responses, etc. Are you saying that that's part of the co-creation?
Yeah, it's hyper meta, I guess.
Meta.
Yeah.
Okay, Erica, what are you thinking?
I feel like y'all just set me up to talk about one of my favorite things, which is I'm thinking about John Dewey and the idea of learning through actually doing something, right, and the mesostic form and Colette's take on it in particular. it's the co-creation of the mesostic. It's also doing something visually where you're actually making tactile things out of language. And I also am really interested in mesostics and how there's an interplay or a blending of voices. So it's not just the writer writing.
Right.
There's a lot of other voices speaking to each other.
Yeah. Max, I want to twist this a little bit and ask you the final question about what Colette did. Colette observes further that she did not journey on the public transport system, which would have been another way of doing this in response to Bart, wherever Colette is. But she says that she's been journeying with Bart, the poem. What does it mean to journey with a text about journeying, a real journey, that is to say, on Labor Day 1976? Max, what do you think of that? Is it just an obvious metaphor, or is there more going on there?
Well, I think the procedure that Colette has applied to the text
is itself a journey, isn't it?
It's itself a journey, and it points to the ways that a text can sort of motivate you to produce in your own way. I mean, I suppose it's kind of journey. I'm afraid I don't want to risk like mixing metaphors either, but yeah, she's taking the parameters or the original guidelines of Bart and kind of expanding on them, extrapolating them, as Jason said, coming up with new procedures, coming up with new methods or new directions for a text in that way.
I just want to add this, and we have someone on the phone. And Jason, would you give Joseph the mic in case, in the next round he has something to say? One of the things that Molly O'Neill says in any video we've ever done about Bart, the original one and then follow-ups, is to point out that labor, or people who labor, workers, are celebrating this day when Bart is free. It's Labor Day. So it's a celebration of laborers. And it's free. And I keep thinking that there's something crucial. But, well, it is, because Ron didn't have a dime to his name, and so he came up with this poem idea and waited months for there to be a free day when he could just ride into Bart. I don't know if Bart is one fare you go as far as... I think it's a great gradational thing, like you have to pay. So he really saved a bunch of money, right? And I think what Colette is doing is using, well, a free MOOC, for one thing, using this poem which celebrates free in the sense of you don't have to pay, to kind of journey along through a bunch of different approaches that you can take to reanimating a text. So there's something really free in all senses. We have someone on the phone, Chris. Who is that?
We do, Al. It's a long-distance call over our Skype account, and it's a really early time to be calling. We have Tan on the line.
From Siberia?
Yay!
Really? Okay. Tan, can you hear me?
I can, Al. Can you hear me?
Oh, my goodness. You're calling from Siberia.
I'm calling at 5 a.m., guys.
Whoa! Oh, wait a minute. Siberia is far away. That's 12 hours away.
It's 12 hours, yeah.
Oh, Tan, do you have to teach tomorrow?
Well, it's today for me, right? So.
Oh, right. So do you have to teach in a few hours?
No, thankfully no. I have a free day.
Oh, good, free.
I have therapy though, so that's going to be interesting.
Okay, well, let's not go there. So
sure.
ModPo is good for you, it sounds like.
ModPo is amazing. I started 3 years ago at a very kind of difficult time of my life, really, and it kept me afloat for that time, and then I just stayed, and I was like, oh, that's fun.
That's good.
And I was like, oh, that improves my writing, and that also gives me that sense of community. And I thought, well,
that's
it should
great.
be worthwhile. Also free. So that's good. That's a perk.
That's great.
But the more I stayed, the more, I guess, value I found in this.
Yeah. And why is
Because
that? Most people
stay.
think of a course as you go in, you do it, and you're done. What more could you get from it?
Well, right, that was my first thought. But then I noticed that it isn't really a course to begin with, to be honest. It's more an invitation to think critically and also to actually be open to this writing that I, as a person, living in Siberia, we aren't taught this. So to me, it's also an invitation to this totally new way of writing and way of thinking and being like, hey, this is for you. Like, learn to understand it.
Wow.
Try to imitate it. Try to mess with it.
I love what you're saying. Would you be willing to be part of the next phase of conversation here, not knowing what we're going to do? Is that okay?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
All right. So Tan and everybody, what we're going to do is I'm going to read I selected some of Bernadette Mayer's experiments, right? And what I selected were experiments that focused on extreme restriction, removal, elimination, negatives, right? Doing something, pulling something out. And I thought I'd read a few of these and go around and get a few reactions, including Joseph and Tan and anybody else who really wants to say something, okay? All right, so here are her proposals, Tan and Joseph, for what you might do if you were going to write a piece of writing that's based on these suggestions, these prompts, right? That's what they are, they're prompts. Okay, 1, attempt writing in a state of mind that seems least congenial. Write what cannot be written. For instance, compose an index. Attempt to eliminate all connotation from a piece of writing. Write taking off from visual projections, whether mental or mechanical, without thought to the word in the ordinary sense. No craft. 2 more. Find the poems you think are the worst poems ever written, either by your own self or other poets. Study them, then write a bad poem. And the last one, write a work gazing into a mirror without using the pronoun I. Joseph, would you be willing to say anything about what these experiments suggest to you? And then we'll go to Tan, if Tan wants.
I do.
Okay, great. Hi, Joseph. So this is Joseph Houlihan. Did I introduce you? I can't believe I didn't. I did. You came all the way from Minneapolis. Why?
Hello. Just see the class and share this with you.
What are we like in person after 5 years? Are we the same people?
Well, it is incredible, sort of seeing people age and aging and that kind of thing.
Anna,
get out!
You're aging.
Very much so.
Wait.
Rapidly.
Dave Poplar. He's saying you're aging. Dave, say something.
I don't want to respond to that at all.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Joseph.
I really love the bad poem constraint. I just think that's a lot of fun, especially because it, you think if you write 1,000 bad poems, they actually turn into really interesting things. And I think that, I think that that's one of the things that we've talked about over the years is just, especially when you set out to write a bad poem, they start to get kind of interesting in a kind of maybe sometimes punk rock way or a way that is super sentimental or something like that.
Right. Right. That's cool. What is achieved by going hunting around the world for bad poems? Anything achieved? Anything positive comes from that?
Well, it's another explicit way of framing your imagination, and so again, with most constraints, it's creating a freedom from your regular automized perception or your ego, and so just coming up with a way to do something in a framework that's otherwise strange. And so, but I think that the bad poems is something that I sort of love.
That's great. Tan, what are your thoughts about any of Bernadette's experiments in this regard?
I love it. It's very freeing because, and that's actually one of the things I wanted to talk about calling you. I wanted to talk about two things, and I'm hoping that I'll kind of be able to talk about the second one. But I found myself loving poems of this week so much, even though I am obsessed with meaning. And that was weird to me. And then I realized, oh, shit, I'm deaf, right? My right ear is kind of like a decoration that I like having, but nonetheless, it's not really functioning. And what it means is I don't hear speech frequency really well, or in some situations at all. And so what happens a lot is human conversation is very meaning charged. And what happens is I have a sense of meaning, like, oh, what you said means something, but I don't really get what that is. And because the conversation is really meaning charged, I feel left out, right? Because there is meaning. But with poems like these, and with restrictions like these, what you inevitably get is a poem that is almost free of meaning unless you want it to be there. And so when I listen to whatever poem there is in the chorus, so if I read it out loud, because that's what I do, if I don't want there to be a meaning, it's not going to be there, and I won't lose anything from the experience of the poem. However, if I want to put that meaning, that kind of, for example, I managed to hear something in the recording and latch on to something that I heard, it's going to be enough for me to experience it. And again, I'm not going to be left with that feeling of loss.
Wow. Tan, that was fantastic. I wonder if Davy and then Erica would be willing to respond to anything Tan just said.
Well, something that Tan was so interesting in what you were saying was thinking about a relationship implicitly between tone and meaning, of understanding like the texture of human voice to convey meaning that you're describing as often unavailable to you, and to think about the way that we imagine the voice as it relates to poems on the page, and think about forms of completeness or incompleteness that kind of equate voice and meaning, and that maybe imagine certain bodies speaking or not speaking poems. And something that I love about what you were saying about the Week 9 poems was that they don't have meaning unless you want them to, which goes back to Colleen's co-creative mesastic experiment. Colette's co-creative mesastic experiment to be able to think about the Week 9 poems as doing exactly what we think ModPo does as a whole, which is provides a framework that is meaningless unless it is immersive. That there is no way for it to be solely a process of receiving, but is only a process that is useful if it's participatory and therefore is changed by participation, which I think is super cool.
Right. Well put. Thank you. Erica, your thought, and then we'll go back to Tan, who should be able to add whatever they want to. Tan called for a different reason than what we're talking about, so I want to give you a chance, Tan, to say what you originally had planned to. Erica, what do you think of what Tan has said? Very interesting stuff about listening, hearing, and this different way of hearing actually enables Tan to be freer somehow, I think is what is being said. Something like that. Erica?
Yeah, I want to actually just start by saying how excited I am to hear Tan's voice and how much I've been enjoying learning from them in the forums.
Tan just said, yay. You didn't hear that.
Yeah. I think that what Tan pointed to was the way that these are poems that if you actively engage with them, so in other words, if you have to sort of work in order to get something, you actually get more. So Davey was saying ModPo itself is this immersive experience that's constantly changing depending on who is part of the conversation. And I would wager that the poems themselves, depending on when we read them, who is reading them, if we're reading them together, and whatever human constraints we bring to the poems, they change, which then makes them better, I wager.
I think that you and I, Erica, among others here, we're not alone, but certainly you and I, we like to teach through the chosen, sometimes arbitrarily chosen poem, sometimes carefully thought about chosen single poem. We like to do that because we're implying that this poem is an excuse for us to have a convening which is going to produce a whole lot more than the poem ever expected to produce. This is kind of obvious after 8 years and after 9 weeks of this. But it's worth noting because it's actually quite a radical way of thinking about education, which is that the content of the delivery mechanism is to provide content that allows people to convene around it and to allow different voices to make manifest whatever meaning is working for them, saying something obvious. Poems become secondary. It's really what Sid Corman meant when he said, you know, I do have something to say, I do have something to tell you, I do have something I think you should know, but that's not important. What's important is that you stay with me, or that you come and convene with me, because if not, I'm not around and you don't exist. We all have to exist here. And the poem is itself not important. Pretty radical stuff, I think. Yeah?
Yeah, I agree. And I would also say that perhaps it's poethical to echo Joan Retallack.
Yeah, that's what poethics is. Oh, wow. Okay. Tan, it's you. You have the floor. Say something and we'll respond. And then, you know, I'm going to break the rule about the second, poor Lily. I'm going to break the rule about the second person receiving a book. We are mailing a book to you in Siberia.
I'm not the postal carrier. I won't be going to.
Okay, but yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, you know, get some layers.
Yeah.
Okay, Tan, it's all yours. What do you want?
Oh, first of all, thank you very much for your responses because, you know, it's very important. I spent years being left out of conversations, and then suddenly being invited to one is super exciting, first of all. But something that I wanted to talk about was actually McClough and his performance, right?
Yeah. Do you mean a vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore?
Yes, absolutely.
Got it.
So I feel like because English is not my first language, first of all, right? And I also I didn't hear a single word that was being said in that performance. It was just noises for me. But I think that it's almost like aided me, weirdly, because when I heard it, I couldn't hear it more for like than 20 seconds. I got overwhelmed really badly after all. There's just so much happening. But the first thought I had when I listened to it was, oh, it's a grief hellscape.
It's a what?
And it's a grief hellscape.
Got it.
I didn't know who it was for, and I didn't know what happened, but I knew immediately that the person died. I didn't need to know the meaning. I didn't need to hear the words, but I knew that the person died, and I knew that was terrible, and it was soul crushing. And something that you had, I remember that was a conversation about this particular performance as an avoidance of talking about grief.
Yes.
And I strongly disagree with that because this is how my process of grieving works. When something terrible happens, some sort of loss, my thought process almost gets reduced to syllables and sounds. And this is all I can understand at that moment, that when nothing makes sense anymore. It's just syllables, sounds, maybe words and phrases if I'm lucky. And so to me, that piece was extremely evocative because I could see it. It was almost like letting grief be embodied because sounds and words and noises and music are frequencies and also waves. They're physical. And it's such a cool way to literally physically embody grief without actually necessarily saying anything super profound or poetic. It becomes poetic because it's so embodied and physical.
Sound is physical, and if we can somehow get ourselves in a position of hearing words as sounds, then we're more closely relating to words, to language as a physical thing.
Yeah, and we also, if we let it happen, I feel like we experience grief through us and let it go through us freer.
Yeah. That's great. Tan, I just feel like what you just said, it made me go for the recording of McClough, but I think then you started talking about words as sounds and the way you hear them, the way you personally hear them, and how you listen to McClure.
Yeah.
And it took me to the John Cage quote about making English less understandable. I think I want to read it, but I want to read especially the second part of it, which is about what you've just been saying. So let me do that, and let me ask a couple of my colleagues to respond to that. So how about Gabe and Anna responding to the Cage in relation to what Tom just said?
Sure.
I let it be known to my friends and even strangers as I was wandering around the country that what was interesting me was making English less understandable. Because when it's understandable, well, people control one another and poetry disappears. And I was saying to my friend Norman O. Brown, and he said, syntax, which is what makes things understandable, is the army, the arrangement of the army. So what we're doing when we make language ununderstandable is we're demilitarizing it so that we can do our living. Here's the part that's really relevant. It's a transition from language to music, certainly. It's bewildering at first, but it's extremely pleasurable as time goes on. And that's what I'm up to. His work, Empty Words, his piece, Empty Words, begins by omitting sentences, has only phrases, words, syllables, and letters. The second part omits the phrases, has only words, syllables, and letters. The third part omits the words, has only syllables and letters. And the last part has nothing but letters and sounds. So, Anna, first, your thought, and then Gabe?
I think the way that maybe we can connect what Cage is saying with what McClure is doing in A Vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore is that because it's an elegy, I would argue that grief itself is not something that's understandable, and like the pain of losing someone is not something that you can like understand in language. So actually it might be, even though like the experience of listening to it can be really challenging, like again, losing someone itself is challenging, that we can't necessarily do justice to the way that we really feel by making things beautiful, right? The experience of loss is not a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Gabe, your thought on this?
Yeah, I have a long answer, but I think it's a good one. Okay. I think about loss as a change in the relationship between a subject and an object, which might be too vague for some people, or maybe too easy. But the reason I think that is because that kind of loss definition encompasses both I lost my pen and I lost my father. You know, both of those things are about a change between you and the object that you have lost and the relationship that's now changed, which means that loss automatically is a problem of reference. I can no longer refer to the thing that I lost in the same way that I used to. I can say my pen, but it's no longer here where I thought it was. Or I can say my dad, but I can no longer really refer to that thing in the same way. This is why grief and loss have such a strong relationship to the unsayable, or to the too difficult to say, or the I can't exactly find my words for it. Because in and of itself, the problem is that your words are not really doing their job in the way you expected them to before the loss happened. Mm-hmm. So that's what's particularly productive about the McClure thing. And I think that's basically what Tan is saying. McClure is basically making a kind of language relationship that captures what's so difficult about loss in the first place, that it's a problem of language. And I think Cage is thinking less about grief or loss necessarily, but thinking about the productivity of making language that kind of difficulty, and the productivity of embodying that kind of difficulty in language and seeing where it takes you on the political front. So
he's also interested in eliminating the natural or almost natural control that happens when you put a subject with an object. The subject generally tries to control the object, at least as a matter of perception or naming with words. Sure. And so I think that Cage is trying to demilitarize language by creating what we might call intersubjectivity, or basically making the subject and object unrecognizable as such. And he's seeking pleasure in that, really, so he's not responding to pain so much. Tan, can we turn back to you for a final thought on all of this, and then we'll say good morning or good night to you?
It's both good morning and good night.
Yes.
Well, I'm just floored by what Gabe said, actually, because it is true, I think, that we can't refer to the thing that we lost in the same way anymore, and this is what makes it so difficult, and this is what makes this piece so touching, I guess. And I've seen a lot of people in the comments and in the chat and on the forums saying that it is very sensory, like a lot, and that's true. But grief also is a lot when you go through it. And so, especially like when you want to refer to someone and you can't, and the person is not there and will never be there anymore, for whatever reason, that for a lot of people is, worse than the loss itself, maybe. The process of losing. And I think it's really well said, Gabe. I really loved it.
Tan, thank you so much for calling. This is so great.
Thank you
I'm glad
guys
we
for existing.
we do exist, solving the how to call problem. Chris and Zach figured it out. I'm glad it worked. It's great to hear your voice. It's great to hear you're there. I hope the day goes okay. At least you don't have to work today. And
it will go on okay.
No, go ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will go on okay. And, it's a good start to a cold and miserable day because it's cold there now.
Yeah. Is it light at 5:45 a.m. in Siberia?
It is 5:45.
Yeah. Is there any sun up?
Yeah, it's about 5:45.
No sun?
No sun. It's dark. It's pitch
dark.
black. It's negative degrees.
No.
It's winter time, guys.
How cold?
Autumn does not
Do you know
exist.
how
autumn?
cold in Fahrenheit is it? Do you know?
Actually, no. I have no idea. But
What is it in
about
centigrade?
like minus 10 Celsius.
Oh, really cold. We are going to get an address for you. Will you give that to Chris? And we'll send you this book, Valley Fever, by Juliet Block, one of our favorite poets. All right, Tan, thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Wow, that was fun. 610-616-3208. 610-616-3208. So, Anna.
Yo.
You like to teach Jackson McClose Call Me Ishmael.
I do.
So I guess I want to read it or part of it.
Okay.
And then I think I want to ask, you'll bat cleanup on this. I want to ask Max, Lily, and Jess to respond to this. I'm going to read it. You may or may not have the text. It's in ModPo Plus under the McClose section. And I mean, suffice to say, he wrote through the beginning of Moby Dick. That's what we need to know. And I guess I want to ask the widest possible question of Max, Lily, and Jess, which is, do you hear Moby Dick? Is Moby Dick still there? Does Moby Dick carry over some stuff to what McClose is trying to do? Is it just it really is kind of gamifying Moby Dick, which is not a bad thing to do, and so on. Okay, Call Me Ishmael. And this really works for people who know the beginning of Moby Dick, which I do because I read the book several times when I was young, and it's just in my head. Circulation and long mind, every interest, somehow mind and every long. Coffin about little money, especially. The letter I, first person. I, sure. Having money about especially little. Cato, a little. Me, extreme. I sail, have me an extreme little. Cherish and left. Myself, extremist. It sees hypos, myself, an extremist left. City, a land. Mouth, east, is spleen. Hand, mouth, an east, land. And that's the beginning of Call Me Ishmael. Okay, Max, what do you think? Do you hear Moby Dick? Does it have any relation to Moby Dick? What do you have to do with that relationship, if anything?
I don't hear as much Moby Dick as I would like to. It's the procedure he's used here pulls out really, like, at least for me, the least Moby Dick words.
Yeah.
that I can think of, except maybe spleen and land, right? So there's a few things that we can like link back up to, something like general about Melville's style, or we know it's they're at sea, something like that. But
well, they're not at sea yet.
Melville,
This is Ishmael has this tendency when there's his dreary November of his soul, and he finds himself following funeral processions.
Looking in coffin warehouses.
So it's got a tone to it. Anyway, go ahead, Max.
Well, I was going to say the relationship for me, or I think what's interesting about choosing Moby Dick for a procedure like this is Moby Dick is often thought of as being this early example of an intertextual novel. There's a lot of Moby Dick is very concerned with other books and other texts that were existing at the time. I mean, the passages about cetology and shipbuilding and stuff are infamous, right? And Melville clearly was, in his own way, writing through the things that he had read, or the things that the libraries that he was familiar with. The archives.
He's very postmodern in that book. Very, very week 10, I think.
In some ways, yes. Postmodernism ahead of its time.
Yeah. Yeah. Jess, what are your thoughts about this? Does it matter? What about Call Me Ishmael, that fabulous phrase, which is about the first person and identity? One of the things we all learn. It's probably the first thing many of us learn about narrators.
Yeah. I mean, I got to level with everybody. I'm feeling like pretty overwhelmed by all this material. And I think it's because, like, Call Me Ishmael, it's a command, it's a prompt, and like every single line in all of these week 9 poems to me feel like Bernadette Mayer writing experiments or something. They're so activating, and they make me want to like write things. And, I feel like I need to make my speech less comprehensible. I'm sort of, I'm I'm bashing my hand into the microphone. But yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that before I say what I actually think about this poem. I don't really hear Moby Dick in it, but I don't really think that matters that much. Right. I think, hearing you read it, that was the first time I'd ever heard it. And yeah, it is inviting. It is an invitation, which is a word that's kind of been in circulation today.
Yeah,
so,
good. Lily, I really love the line, I sail have me an extreme little. And it's sort of like the book in a nutshell or something like that.
Yeah.
You don't have to read 565 pages, including all the cetology. You can just do that one line. I sail have me an extreme little. Anyway, what are your thoughts about this?
Right before I came to the webcast, I was meeting with a student, and she was telling me about a movie that she watched for another class where, like, to understand the movie, you had to have, seen a different movie that it was riffing off of.
Yeah.
And she said this thing that I've been thinking about, which I thought was very sweetly encapsulated, like either a problem or a perk of the work this week, depending on how you look at it, where she said, I can't tell if that makes it the worst movie ever or a really great movie. And I was thinking about, is it the worst poem ever because you have to have read all of Moby Dick to understand it? Or is it like the smartest, best thing someone could write because he's been able to be concise? What kind of relationship is this poem wanting to have with Moby Dick?
Yeah. Thank you. I want to get back at some point to Anna, who will say something about teaching this poem because she's probably taught it more than anybody else here. But somebody's on the phone, so I want to bring that person in. And who is it, Chris?
Hey, Al. Well, just a quick update. I did some research. Negative 10 degrees Celsius is about 17 degrees Fahrenheit.
Burn.
Oh, so it's not negative degrees in Fahrenheit, but it's still pretty darn
That's
cold.
still pretty cold. I'm sorry, 14 degrees Fahrenheit.
14,
sorry.
okay.
And our next caller is calling from England, where it is 46 degrees Fahrenheit. And that person is Sharon Wells.
Oh, I'm so glad Sharon called. Hi, Sharon. Can you hear me?
Hi. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Al. Yes, I can hear you.
How's the dog?
He's snoring at the moment, fast asleep.
You brought remind me of the dog's name.
Smuggler.
Smuggler, that's right. You smuggled Smuggler into our meetup in London, and then smuggled Smuggler into the bar.
It was awesome.
Well, they were very kind at the hotel there because I said, could we take the dog in? And they said, is he an assistant's dog, madam? And nodded very vigorously. So they pretended he was an assistant's dog.
That's great. Well, he just sort of plopped down and didn't mind what we had to say.
I got to snuggle
No.
with her. It was great.
No,
And you got to snuggle with Smuggler?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, she did.
Anna's very happy about that. How are you? Are you calling from your boat?
No, I'm at home at the moment. Just come back from orchestra rehearsal. So.
Oh, that's right. You said you were going to do that.
Yeah.
How
So
funny
term time is
that?
orchestra time. So yeah.
That's
yeah,
great.
So
Just-
boat tomorrow. Going to Gloucester by boat tomorrow.
They have the three of them have a boat, and they go places.
Me and Smuggler and John.
Yeah. And we met John too, and they just go. They say, "Well, let's do 3 days along this canal or something," and then they just do it. Yeah. Anyway, do you have a question or comment about week 9? Crazy old week 9.
I don't have a specific comment. I rang in to say hello, but actually it was quite opportune that you're talking about Call Me Ishmael because we've been discussing it on the global study thread.
Yeah.
And
noticed.
thoroughly enjoying the discussions on that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
So-
And so John sort of sees you doing this course. He's kind of dipped in a little bit, but mostly, I guess I'm interested in this whole question of how those of us who fall headlong into experimental poetry that a lot of people think is just weird and what are you getting from that? How do you translate for your non-ModPo people? Jess herself just said that it was overwhelming.
In a good way.
In a good way, right?
Going back to John, I remember him saying when he came to the second reading that we had in London that he hadn't yet written his book on what it's like to live with a ModPo addict.
Yeah, yeah.
So he hasn't quite got dragged in the same way. But as far as the aleatoric thing goes, one of the things that's come up in this discussion, and it's come up in other discussions about cages, for me, similarity to aleatoric music.
Yes.
And John and myself have played quite a lot of that and enjoyed it, and I think maybe that helps me certainly with this week. Helps quite a lot.
Well, music is, aleatoric music is kind of a natural move for music to have made as it moved through modernism, and I think for poetry, you got as far as the modernists, and then some people, Joyce was doing some things, and Beckett wrote a book called What, which is just full of repetitive sounds. But really, it took a while for writing to start doing this thing, and that's an interesting question. It really
and
is.
I think in Call Me Ishmael, that repetition actually, I think it's part of the enjoyment of it.
Yeah.
The long, little. I know the words are chosen to spell out Call Me Ishmael, but just that repetition, having chosen those words. It's very, very rhythmic and musical.
Yes. I want to invite you to say anything you like, and I'll specify a little more in a second, but I'm going to ask Dave Poplar to respond somehow. So I guess the question is partly about this. I was asking it of Joseph a little while ago. So you've been with ModPo for some years. I don't know how many, 5, 6, maybe 7. And I wonder what the purpose of doing it again and again could possibly be. I'm not just fishing for compliments. I'm actually curious. And Dave's been around for 8 years in ModPo. He might have something to say in response to that. So what do you think? Why do this again and again? What's to be gotten from it? Isn't it a little boring? Sharon?
Oh, sorry. I
that was for you. Dave will respond.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all right.
No, not at all. I think it's 5 or 6 years probably for me. And the first 3 years, I did methodically work through the whole course and didn't miss a single early part of it because I think it's repetition again. I think going back over it just made me get more enjoyment from it. And now because I'm more on the sidelines as a mentor. I'm not working my way through it.
Right.
I'm going back and finding new things, maybe on things that I overlooked because I was working through it as trying to get the certificate or trying to complete the course. So now I'm getting probably more enjoyment, I think, actually, with discussing other aspects of things with people.
And by the way, Sharon,
never get bored.
Thank you for working as a community TA. Your work is tremendous. I want to give Dave the floor for a little bit because he's got to leave at 6. So he can respond to Sharon and maybe offer us a general or finalish thought for the week. Sharon, so you've seen the 2012 videos, and now you see us often in webcasts. We've all kind of grown up together. I almost said grown old together, but. Yeah. So Dave,
that's what I've loved about it, actually, seeing all the TAs grow with the course as it's gone.
Yeah,
it's been wonderful.
I think that's true. So I wanted to turn to Dave to talk about growing old with the course.
Why
Dave,
am I always
you have
the
the
one
floor
you turn to when you talk about growing old.
Aww.
I mean, everybody's growing old at the same age here. So
you mean the same rate?
The same rate, yeah. Anyway.
And Davey's got to leave. Davey, get to the mic for a final word. Literally a final word. Just a word or two. A word or two.
I'm busy listening to Dave.
Okay. Bye,
That's
Dave.
my final word.
Bye.
Bye, Dave.
See you in week 10, if not sooner. All right, Dave, back to you.
Well, to comment, just as somebody I think we know once said, if something is boring after 2 minutes, try it for 4. If it is still boring, then 8, then 16, then 32. Eventually, one discovers that it is not boring at all.
Eventually, after 8 years.
Yeah, I think we can apply that to ModPo pretty well.
That's great. Do you have a final thought about week 9?
I was trying to think of sort of a general metaphor about what is going on here that's different from some of the other poems. I come back to food a lot. So you could reverse engineer a salad. Like when we do close readings, it's like we're picking apart different things. You can reverse engineer a salad. You can pick out the ingredients. But you can't really do that with something like a soup where it's all molded together. And for some reason, I feel like what's being done here is sort of like trying to reverse engineer a soup in a way to distill it in ways that it can't be done. I don't know if that's a really apt metaphor or not, but I was kind of hungry when I was thinking of it. So,
I like that, Dave. I can't tell whether you're meaning it to be a positive or negative thing, and that's good.
It can be either.
Right, it could be either. I mean, there's something integral about soup, and if you try to pick it apart, it's not going to resemble itself at all and be quite a mess. Dave, thank you. Sharon?
Yes?
Say hi to John and Smuggler for us.
I will. And I'd like to say snaps to the techie duo for organising Skype for those of us who are further away.
Yeah, so everybody's going to start using Skype now. That worked out. I'm glad we're going to get some international calls. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
All right.
I'll pass on your best regards. I'll go and give Smuggler a big hug from you.
Okay, great. Have a great evening. I hope to see you again
Thank you.
soon. Okay. Fantastic.
Oh, Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon's fantastic. Okay, what I want to do, starting with Jason, is I want to read a couple of Cage adages and get your reaction to that. One Dave just quoted. I like this one. I have nothing to say, and I am saying it, and that is poetry as I needed it. Maybe I'll do two more. As far as consistency of thought goes, I prefer inconsistency. It's kind of an obvious one at this point. The first question I ask myself when something doesn't seem to be beautiful is, why do I think it's not beautiful? And very shortly, you discover that there is no reason. Okay, Jason, I'd like you to go first, and then I'm going to ask Erica and Anna to respond to anything that Cage has said. Meantime, after that, we're going to look at tweets and discussion forum comments, and then we'll go to final words. So get your tweets in so we can quote you. Okay, Jason, a thought on what Cage said? Any of those?
Yeah, well, I think Cage is working out of the Zen Buddhist tradition, which I think is really important to, well, I don't think it's important to know anything, but I think it's important in that the student goes to the Zen master to ask a question, and the Zen master pushes the student into the mud. So, and that's the answer. And
It's what we do here at the Writer's House, by the way.
Exactly. But, and I think that there's a way to relate those adages to the question of grief, which is really has been really resonating with me since we started mentioning it. And in a way, part of Zen Buddhism would be to move past grief and move past permanence, and in a way move past language itself. In Zen meditation, one is silent or makes a single sound. And from what Gabe said before about the pen,
Losing the pen,
that language itself couldn't exist without the possibility of loss.
Yeah.
Because we have language to be able to discuss that which isn't present with us now.
Yes.
Necessarily.
Yes.
And what really came to mind, and this is making a weird digression, and then I'll just shut up, but the end of Wallace Stevens is not an aleatory poet, but I think he gestures at it in The Idea of Order at Key West, which the last three lines are, well, the maker's rage to order words of the sea, words of the fragrant portals dimly starred, and of ourselves and of our origins, in ghostlier demarcations, keener sounds. And in reading this poem again for like the 30th time, I looked up to keen, and to keen is to wail with loss.
Yeah.
And in a sense, the eruption of language with Peter Innisfree Moore is, in a way, a almost bodily response to the absence of another presence, a kind of filling the silence with sound. So I think it's really interesting to think about Cage versus the Peter Innisfree Moore poem, which are, in some sense, opposite ends of the same spectrum.
You better go home and write the following essay, applying ghostlier demarcations, keener sounds of the idea of order at Key West, and McClo's elegy, because you just did it. I see what he was doing there on the stage with his colleagues was ghostlier demarcations. And the keener sounds become the wailing of mourners. That's what it sounds like. Holy shit. Anna, get ready to say something brief, and then Lily, and then I'm going to throw Max in there too. But let's just listen to a second of ghostlier demarcations, keener sounds.
I'm ready.
Re-import.
I sit into I make vestments.
Move. Rinse.
Feistier. Operos rival.
To think about that as mourners wailing, and that the crazy deterministic score that he created were the ghostlier demarcations. Pretty stunning. Thank you, Jason. Anna, a quick thought, and then Lily, and then Max? On anything. The cage, what just got said, this thing about loss that Gabe started today. Gabe's the onlyest inventor, begetter of loss. No, I mean what Gabe said about this profound thing about language
I
and
started
loss.
that. And then
You started it, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you have something to say?
I do. No, I do. Because I really totally hear and sympathize with those who listen to A Vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore and are like, I cannot listen to this. It's really hard to listen to. I cannot figure out what's going on. It's not aesthetic. It's not beautiful. It's not like, what am I listening to? Like, I hear that because it is hard to listen to. But the connection with keening that Jason brought up, I think, is really apt. Keening is about just giving like sound and like physical bodily vocalization to like how painful it is to lose someone. And there's something about the vocabulary of Peter Innisfree Moore that gives that same like raw pain a kind of shape. It might not be the same kind of recognizable shape, but it's, instead of just wailing sound, it's wailing words that are taken from the letters of his name.
Right.
So like in that sense, it's still just a vocalization. It's still like a bodily performance. It still takes a lot for you to listen to it. But there's like a shape to it that comes from the actual letters of his name.
Doesn't cancel the ghostliness of it.
Nope, not at all.
But provides some kind of consolation because of the order, the idea of order. All right? So, I mean, it may well be that the first poetry, that the first Homo sapiens, poetry was wailing the loss. Imagine there was a lot of loss, a lot of rapid loss in short-lived lives and lives of, constant precarity and danger. And one imagines that poetry was this kind of consolation that didn't solve any problems.
Right. I mean, we talked about this yesterday in our class, but what's left of someone after they're gone is not really anything except a name. So it's a really kind of remarkably beautiful gesture to not just use words to describe someone, but only use words that could possibly have come from their name.
That's a great thing about what he did in honor of this photographer friend of his. Lily, quick thought on this, and then Max?
I'm thinking about that a key element in this piece is the process, and this like sort of BS, but maybe, I don't know, depends on if you subscribe to it or not, but this theory of like stages of grief or something, and that like there's a prescribed...
How many stages are there supposed to be according to that BS?
Five, 6?
7?
I don't know. It's like anger, sadness, regret, I don't know. Whatever the stages are, it's like a prescribed path you're supposed to go through. And so I've been thinking a lot about, imagine like a very dear person passes away, and instead of working on whatever the things that, like getting your life in order or whatever, what you sit down to work on is like furiously writing very strict and specific rules and procedures for a performance. as opposed to whatever the other kind of work you're like supposed to be doing while you're
Right.
grieving. This is like a really on the part of McClough, like a really beautiful, like the performance is beautiful, but the creation of the process is a really beautiful way I'm imagining to process like your own grief.
It's what Jackson would have said too. If you say, "I really like that piece," he'd say, "Well, I hope you like the procedure because that's the art." You know, he would say that very insistently. Max, what's your quick thought on this?
I like the way that the procedure here is communal and social, and it stands a little bit in opposition to say like the Cagean mesostic procedures that we've been looking at, which are sort of in isolation. And I think that's perhaps that would be perhaps a sort of like half-baked idea of grief or something, right? That like they go, you have to now go mourn in solitude and try to re-establish meaning or something in your life by following these ritualistic patterns of mourning or grieving. Whereas here, it's the procedure's about getting all your friends together. It's about getting everyone together to celebrate and to be together, to grieve in that way. And I think that reminds us of a lot of grieving in funerary rituals in the way that they're intensely social.
We all know that the best memorials are, I'll speak for myself. I believe that the best memorials, the ones I remember, are the ones where everybody gets to say something, even if it takes a long time. Okay, I think what we should do is quote a few tweets. Wow, quote some tweets. And something in the forum. Anna, why don't you and I do that? And then we're going to go around for final words, including Joseph. So go ahead.
I mean, the forum has been really wonderfully active tonight. Stephanie wrote a poem while watching the webcast.
Yeah, I haven't seen that before.
With the constraint of looking at the mirror and writing a poem.
It begins with, "I don't write poems," which is a great paradox. It's
wonderful.
Yeah.
So I love that. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing, and thank you for using the webcast
And
as a
Allison
space to do that.
Fraser from Canada, right?
Yep.
Snaps for the Siberian Division. And tweets.
Nicholas wrote a great question that I kicked over to Erica, so I punted to Erica.
About poethics.
About
I saw
poethics.
that. Yep.
And I wanted to...
Seattle.
I know. Throw this one out there from Lawrence Torino. Can I just respond to this one real quick?
Quickly, yeah.
So fast. So Lawrence writes, "This week really rubs me at times. I mean, if I take a calculus formula and apply it to the dictionary or King Lear, is it anything more than an interesting exercise? Extremely yes. Please do that and send me what you come up with. That sounds awesome." I mean, yeah, like I think there can be resistance to this week, and that sometimes the experimental work can feel sort of cold if it feels like empty of this like authorial presence. But the more you do this kind of experimental work, the more I think you realize that you, the person who's doing the experiment, are present in every single decision that gets made at every layer of that decision.
Yes.
So, Lawrence, if you can come up with some kind of calculus formula to write yourself through King Lear, please do that, and please send it to me because I want to read it.
Very cool. I hope Lawrence will do that. Ton Speaks, which is to say Ton, tweets, "The last weeks of ModPo Live brought up grief, loss, and disability a lot. It's been healing and oddly comforting to find joy in the absence of meaning and incompleteness." And there's a lot of praise for Ton. Neuropsychology, which I believe is Risser, Anthony Risser. Great comments on the webcast, Stupid Poetry, which is Ton. Very thoughtful and compelling. Loss, Kim Conveny, loss as a problem of reference. Summarizing something Gabe said. Great. Okay, so let's get final words. And I want to invite Gabe to take a little longer than the others because it's been a while since we heard his voice, although my chart says that he's talked as much, but I still want to give him some more time. No, I do keep a chart. I want to make sure everybody gets. But I invite Gabe to go on a little longer than usual. So let's start with Jess and then go to Joseph, and we'll see what happens from there. Jess, final thoughts?
Sure. I sort of want to add what's the word, a postscript to my sort of hysterical microphone bashing comment earlier that I was sort of overwhelmed by these poems, and you know, I want to clarify that I mean that in the best way, because to your point, Anna, about these poems perhaps feeling cold, right? I mean, I think it's interesting to have that adjective in my head, because to me, like, my reaction to every line, right, which I said, like, every line of the Week 9 poetry feels like an invitation or a prompt or an incitement. Like, it's very activating, I think, to read this work. And I guess my final word is that there's something to be said for just experiencing that that invitation as an invitation that might not lead to anything, but that there's like a lot of value and enjoyment and potentially meaning, right? As Tom was saying, that might be there if we want it to be there, or if we need it to be there, right? Which is something that Cage acknowledges, that, you know, poetry can mean nothing if that's what you need it to be or to mean.
Jess, you're TA this year, and this is your first time really going through the course. So chapter 9, suddenly there it is. And is this roughly the first time you're doing aleatory poetry, or you've done it before? You've studied it before?
No, I've never studied it.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I've like heard of these individuals, and
yeah.
I've like read, I've encountered Joan Rotalick as like a Steinian and whatnot, but
yeah.
But
we didn't talk about Not a Cage, and that's partly because we talk about it every year at great length because it's such a great poem. We just didn't talk about it tonight.
Yeah.
But she does fit here. She's she's very interested in Cage.
Yeah. I mean, the work is new to me, but it definitely makes sense within the lineage of the course, and
right.
Especially in lineage with Stein, which is someone that I think obsessively about. So.
Yeah, chapters 9.1 and 9.2 look back to Stein pretty, and in some ways some of chapter 10. Week 10, chapter 9.3. So, for instance, Tracy Morris, who, by the way, will be with us next week at live here for our webcast. Tracy Morris, the course ends with Tracy Morris, and she has recently really got into rewriting Stein too. So Stein comes back.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jess. All right, so we're going to turn to Joseph Houlihan for a final thought, and then I'd like to turn to Gabe.
Well, I would just say thanks again. This has just been such a generous experience and very social. And one new resonance that I had not thought of before that came up for me during this podcast was when we spoke about Call Me Ishmael, I just thought about Olson. And I had read a little while ago the correspondences between Charles Olson and Edward Dahlberg. And I learned that after graduating, Olson was able to get sort of first crack at the Melville Library, and through his research, he wrote the title "Call Me Ishmael," which was really about the way that Melville relied on Shakespeare and other masters for the bones of Moby Dick, and so just the spine idea, the misostic of "Call Me Ishmael." Was really fascinating for me, and so Dahlberg wrote a similar book called "Do These Bones Speak?" About the sort of deep structural motifs in certain American classics, and so I just thought it was really fascinating. So the first time, of course, Moby Dick was written, there was no Ahab and there was no whale, and so so I just
think about that for a second.
Yeah, right. I just want to share that.
Joseph, that was great. That was really great. I mean, Olson was obsessed with Melville for a bunch of reasons. I mean, being in Gloucester, which is a place of whaling, didn't hurt at all. Dahlberg, wow. Nobody says anything about Dahlberg these days. He was a crusty guy. But anyway, Edward Dahlberg, if anybody wants to read some really weird shit from heyday was the 1930s. Very difficult person who wrote he was a communist for about 5 minutes, and then he wrote these really weird things. The fact that Olson and Dahlberg were together is a little frightening. I didn't even know that. But thank you for traveling and being here and being so great. You're such a natural at this. Really appreciate that. This one over here is writing down names for CTA for next year, so don't be surprised if you get an invitation. Gabe.
Hello.
What are you thinking about? Take your time.
You know, Al, giving me license to speak as long as I want may have a monkey's paw effect for all of you. But
Wait, play that all the way out. What happens? How does the monkey's paw work there for that? We all turn it. What happens to us?
You get too much of what you wish for.
It was a simple joke. You can't ask the joke to do more than it was designed to do. Anyway,
Well, you as the lawyers say, you opened the door, right?
I do know what I'm going to say, and it won't take that long.
Okay,
But-
go ahead.
So, going off of my comments earlier, I want to say that the reason I know things about loss is not because I've read a lot of books, which I guess I've read a lot of books, but is because I've experienced it, and something that I know the person I followed, Anna, can share with me. And one thing else that I want to add about that is on the issue of grief, you just never stop grieving. Unfortunately, bad news, everybody. You never stop grieving. So it's kind of like, I think of grief as, excuse me, my cat just jumped on me. So I think of grief as Odysseus's grip on Proteus. As Proteus shapeshifts under his arms, Odysseus continues to hold a grip over him. And I think of grief that way, where the loss itself, the pain itself, is constantly changing shape under you. And you can have a grip of it, and the grip will do things for you, but it's also going to change in ways that are constantly surprising. And the reason I mention all of this is not just to wax, but also to say that this is maybe why randomness, spontaneity, and its sort of evil cousin, chaos, has such a relationship to writing about loss, writing about grief, writing about death. Loss and grief is the thing we constantly don't know. And so you can see a lot of writers trying to wrap their heads around this crazy concept by also writing in a way that they cannot know. So that's all.
That's all, but that's great. I mean, that's big stuff. Thank you, Gabe. And thank you for ironizing the amount of time I gave you. That was well done. Anna is next, since you were mentioned in the last comment, and then Max. Final thoughts.
I completely agree with Gabe that there's something about this week that, despite the fact that it feels like the work is only celebrating randomness and only celebrating chaos and non-authorship and non-intention, when you hold those types of experiments and structures against something that is itself as unknowable and unsayable as like grief and loss, what ends up happening is this kind of work actually feels more true to the experience of grieving than a like perfectly composed sonnet or a perfectly written funeral eulogy.
Yeah.
I think what ends up happening is you realize that there's a certain amount of freedom that comes from embracing the randomness. There's a certain amount of, wow, it's okay that I don't have a definite shape to this. It's okay that it's okay that I've experienced the kind of like accidental random loss that just like happens to people, it's okay. The person who gives you the platitude of like, oh, well, there's like a higher meaning to this and everything happens for a reason, like that kind of like sort of platitude thing that means nothing. It's oddly comforting to be like, you know what, this is like a random, terrible thing that happened. And if I can get some space in this work that's really challenging and that actually like speaks to the randomness of this pain and speaks to the daily randomness, there's something about that feels much more reassuring and much more true to the things that I feel every single day of my life than something that's so perfectly composed.
That was beautifully said, and it also it sort of allows us to do a quick take on, let's say, pre-modern versus modern writing, or attitudes that, let's just use the word conservative, okay? Traditional and conservative attitudes about writing and what writing does, as distinct from, let's just say, more experimental, maybe radical or progressive attitudes. Sorry to make such a clear distinction. But once upon a time, the idea was that the chaos and randomness of the universe had to be met by perfect aesthetic organization, right?
Right.
And its incommensurateness was not a problem. And some people felt that that was a good thing. What you're saying is that if the world is characterized by randomness, precarity, and accident, then the representation of that has to be precarious and accidental. And that's a simple thing. That's what's being said at the end of this course. A lot of people say, no, I really want that. I want human perfection to remind me that life goes on and it can be ordered. But that's a repressing or suppressing of chaos. And so, we can disagree. People can disagree. ModPo stands on one side of this, clearly.
There's still art on both sides, right? There's still art that's possible in both modes. But I feel more drawn to the art that speaks to the accidental.
Well, certainly. And certainly the McKay's sonnet is a sonnet, but it's also ironized in order to point out the problem of incommensurateness. So that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Anyway, we could go on about that. But thank you. I wanted to turn to Max for a final thought.
I wanted to circle back to Colette's writing through of Bart, and sees on one detail in Colette's process in particular, the using of the non-dominant hand to transcribe. I thought was really neat. And in addition to being like such a perfect synopsis of this sort of relinquishing of domination of meaning that domination of a text that happens with these procedures, it also calls attention to the embodiment of reading and writing, and hopefully also calls our attention to the different sort of physical demands or demands on ability that poetic processes can make. And I think that Tan's comment about their experience with their hearing also attested to that. And I think that'll be a helpful thing to carry through to next week, where we also, with some of these conceptual poems, we get also this kind of like these sort of feats of endurance and physical strength that are potentially problematic when we think about who those feats are available for, or who can pursue those kinds of conceptual works.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. And I'm glad you plugged week 10, chapter 9.3. There's a lot of material we're going to get to next week. But first, Lily Applebaum, a final thought, and then we'll go to Erica.
Thinking a lot about Cage's making English less understandable, and the beauty of that statement and how it is so directly linking language and the military and policing, and just thinking a lot about, like, in my work as an English teacher, that it's one of those fields, like you were talking about before, where theoretically there's a lot of content that just needs to be absorbed.
Right.
Is one way to teach it, or you can like work to try to not teach it that way. And how I sort of like every time I leave the ESOL classroom, I feel like I can't speak English anymore, in like a positive way. And just that I do sort of feel like every ESOL speaker who learns English does make English a little bit less understandable in like a very positive way, in the sense that, like, if we are co-creating what language means or whatever, we're striving to do that in the classroom, then we're cracking it a little bit, like cracking away a little bit of its, like, I don't know, hegemony or something.
Yeah.
It's all
good. Thank you. Erica, final thought?
I want to tell a very short little story that I think connects a bunch of things that we've been talking about. And it's about like a kind of spectacular experience I had in 2013 where I just moved upstate and was about to go and live in Berlin for a couple of months as part of my job. And I was talking to Joan Rotalick before I left, and she told me that in a place called Halberstadt, there is a John Cage installation called As Slow as Possible, that is essentially a pipe organ that plays his composition over the span of 639 years. And, without knowing anything except for the fact that Cage's language and writing is really important to me, I decided to make a kind of pilgrimage to Halberstadt. And I feel like that's a trip where I learned probably more about language than I've ever learned. I don't speak any German, and I was traveling into an area where no one spoke English. So the only shared language I had with people that I would see or ask for directions was Cage, or John Cage. And it was really this. And then when I finally got there and you're in this room with this incredibly old pipe organ that only changes notes once every 10 or so years, you're confronted by the spectacle of silence, and you're kind of pushed to hear things that one doesn't ever hear. And I don't know that that I've heard anything like it since. So I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but I'm feeling really moved by what Gabe and Anna were just saying, and also thinking about teaching through Lily and Tan and the accessibility of language. And it's just reminding me of all of the language that exists in silence.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Erica, very much. Jason, final thought, and then me. I'm going to say goodnight after a final thought.
Okay. At the beginning of at the end of Antarctis's introduction to McLeod's Stein poems, I believe she quotes him as saying, I returned to using a deterministic procedure when I began writing the poems in the Stein series, but now I always, to some extent, modify the results of the procedure, making personal decisions of many different kinds. My writing ways come together. And in the forums a couple days ago, I was talking with Helen O'Neill, and we were thinking about, and I think one reason these algorithmically or chance procedure poems are frustrating or still maybe something you can't wrap your head around is because in a way they point to our own, if one does not believe in a soul, as I don't, that what selfhood or authorship is contingent on the available language, I'm reading what I wrote, predetermined by rules already socioeconomic, embodied ideologically in the writer's experience in the world. And is this self, which is the sum of a kind of almost infinite number of contingent procedures, something that we maybe even unconsciously feel anxious about when we encounter the Diatex 5 system. And that the loss of, and because the contingent rules of selfhood are infinite in outcome, every individual is unique and there's only one, there's what they can say is priceless, is beyond value, so that the loss of another is the loss of a path of possibility. And that's what, and the path of possibility of our encounter with that path. And that's what makes grief so unbearable, that unique self's capacity, that unique self's voices, absolute, it vanishes.
Thank you for that, Jason. One somewhat askew point that I was thinking of when you were talking was this idea that these poets seem to be wanting to suppress subjectivity, and using these procedures and computer programs to get the ego out, but subjectivity sneaks in through the back door. So much so that the McClough performance was unreproducible as such. It was a very unique performance that they did that we've got the recording of in 1975. Thank you. Okay, final thought from me. Two things. One is just to quote Jenna Osman. We didn't talk about dropping leaflets this week. A great poem which was produced. How Lily? She got mad at a post 9/11 war making
at news coverage, and she she printed out articles or took newspaper articles and crumbled them up or cut them up and bombed them onto the floor of her
standing on a
studio
chair
and
or
then
something. Yeah.
Wrote what had formed after that.
Yeah, and the preface is a quotation from a woman who was a congressperson at the time, Cynthia McKinney, in November 2001. And McKinney says, and this is the epigraph of that poem, help me come up with a strategy to get through this white noise. So the white noise is the bullshit that was being said by the Secretary of Defense and other people after 9/11, justifying the war in Afghanistan, among other things. And so that's the white noise. And Osman is trying to figure out how to create noise that will get through the white noise via this congressperson. And what Jenna says at the beginning of this piece, which I think a lot of us think is successful, is, I don't have that strategy. In other words, this poem is not the strategy. So you get something that occurs to some people in week 9 as white noise is hardly that, is set up against white noise. It's worth thinking about in political context. Okay, the second final thought is a quotation from Mindy LaBelle, who wrote in the forums this beautiful little praise of ModPo, but it has a point in it that I want to make. I have been an intermittent, largely non-participatory ModPoer for the last 3 years, but don't let that fool you. I love ModPo so much. I love being able to click on a video any time of the day or night, immerse myself in a poem, and let my mind wander and wonder. It is so stress relieving. I also very much appreciate your emails throughout the year. Do not encourage me, Mindy. They make me feel connected to this ModPo universe. Thank you for creating an amazing program. Thank you, the TAs, for sharing your thoughts in such an open, kind, and respectful way. You're all amazing. And the point I want to make, thank you, Mindy, first of all, but the point I want to make is, yes, intermittent, largely non-participatory, but don't let that fool you, she says. There are so many ways to be involved with this, and so many of them are not really visible. It was only that, Mindy had to tell me that, for me to be actually aware that she was a participant, but she obviously, from what she said, feels totally involved with our community. There's a lot of quiet participants out there, lots and lots of them, and many of them are watching this webcast. Okay, if they're still here, because it's a long one, thank you to Tan and Sharon and Joseph for coming, Ton and Sharon for calling in, and Joseph for coming all the way. Next week, a week from today, we'll be joined by Tracy Morris for our last week. Following that, on the following Monday, will be our Final Words webcast. Please tune into that, and for that, you'll be calling in or Skyping in to do your own final words. Thank you, Anna, Lily, Jess, and Max, and Gabe, and Erica. Thank you so much. And Chris and Zach and Jason. And Chris and Zach for the tech. Thank you, Chris and Zach, for doing it again. All right. This is Al signing off. We'll see you next week, and we'll see you in the forums.